The Imperial Fists are one of the first founding chapters of Space Marine, originally formed as the 7th Legion of the Legiones Astartes. Raised by the Emperor himself during the Unification Wars, their origins are deeply rooted in their martial history, in particular that of Holy Terra itself. What sets the Imperial Fists apart from their brother chapters is a lack of a fixed homeworld. Instead of being bound to one singular planet, the Imperial Fists have, for over 10,000 years, called their colossal mobile fortress the legendary Phalanx, their fortress-monastery. And while they maintain recruitment chapters scattered across various worlds, including Necromunda, their central presence has often been on Terra itself. During the era of the Great Crusade, the Imperial Fists would be tasked with a role of immense significance. They were the Emperor's Praetorians, his personal guardians, entrusted with accompanying him wherever he went. Their tactical expertise often made them the spearhead of many decisive engagements, dealing crushing blows to all the enemies of the nascent Imperium. However, after the Horus Heresy and the Emperor's mortal wounding, the responsibility of guarding his personhood was passed exclusively to the Adeptus Custodes, his personal bodyguards. Despite this shift, the honor of having once held such a trusted position granted to them by the Emperor still resonates deeply within the Imperial Fists chapter and many of their successors. This legacy remains a fundamental aspect of their identity, and it ensures their continued prominence and dedication to the Imperium, even in the present day after multiple near annihilations. The Imperial Fists were once the most revered and steadfast of the Space Marine chapters, and they are the proud heirs of the legacy of the legendary Primarch Rogal Dorn. Dorn's name is an enduring symbol of loyalty and resilience, which has been venerated by countless trillions across the Imperium over the millennia. However, some of the details of his early life are less certain than that of other Primarchs, such as Reboot Guilliman. When the Primarchs were originally scattered to the far reaches of the galaxy, Dorn's fate would be obscured for a significant amount of time, and what is known most clearly and agreed on by Imperial scholars completely is that when the Great Crusade reached the frozen ice hives of Inuit, Dorn would emerge, offering a gift that would cement his place in history. His offering was none other than the legendary Phalanx, one of the mightiest vessels ever constructed by the humans of the Dark Age of technology, which would be a powerful symbol of his fealty to the Emperor and the allegiance of Inuit. The Emperor, recognizing his long-lost son, would welcome Dorn into the fold and grant him command over the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists. As the Primarch, as the Phalanx was Dorn's prized warship, it would be returned to him. While the Imperial Fists would eventually prove themselves as masters in all forms of warfare, their unmatched expertise in siegecraft, in particular in the defensive aspect, set them apart from all the other legions. They became renowned for their ability to both build and breach most formidable fortifications, a talent that stoked a fierce rivalry between them and the Iron Warriors Legion, along with their Primarch Perturabo. This bitter enmity was aggravated by Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children, who intentionally sowed discord between the two. Fulgrim seemed to enjoy stirring the flames of rivalry, and once went as far as to question whether a fortress designed by Dorn could withstand the Iron Warriors, which led to the confident reply from Dorn that it could, showing that Dorn unintentionally played into Fulgrim's hand, who knew it would be seen as a personal slight by Perturabo, which planted the seeds of hatred that would fester and deepen over time, long before the heresy itself would actually begin. In the turbulent times that would follow, as Horus's betrayal unfolded, determining loyalty would become increasingly difficult. The face of a once trusted ally could no longer reveal whether they remained steadfast or had turned traitor, even after Horus's treachery was revealed on Isstvan III and the catastrophic dropsite massacre occurred on Isstvan V. The lines between friend and foe would become significantly blurred, leaving a long-standing mark, which caused the Imperial Fists to forever hold some great amount of suspicion and uncertainty in the wake of this betrayal. In an age marked by treachery where even the most trusted of allies could not be relied upon, it seems one legion would remain resolute in all instances in their loyalty. The Imperial Fists, led by their indomitable Primarch, Rogal Dorn, throughout both civil war Throughout the brutal civil war-torn Imperium, the Imperial Fists would stand unyielding, never faltering in their devotion to the Emperor, to the point that other legions did not even dare question their loyalty, or if it could be swayed in any way. Despite the heavy toll such loyalty demanded, the sacrifices they endured shaped those who survived forevermore, leaving scars both physical and mental. The ultimate test of Dorn's fortifications would come in the climactic siege of Terra, when the traitor legions led by Horus assaulted the very heart of the Imperium, and it was the defenses that Rogal Dorn had meticulously crafted around the Imperial Palace which faced the relentless assault, and none of those assaults were more savage than those of the World Eaters, who breached the walls through sheer brutal force rather than any strategic brilliance. Yet the full outcome of the siege would be left unresolved, as while the War Master Horus would fall in combat to the Emperor himself would be brutally wounded in combat. The rivalry between the Imperial Fists and the Iron Warriors would reach its bitter peak shortly after the Heresy, during an infamous event known as the Iron Cage Confrontation. This battle was fought during the height of the Great Scouring, and saw the two legions clashed with unrestrained fury. The details of what transpired within the Iron Cage remain hotly debated by some to this day, with many Imperial Fists and their supporters claiming victory over the Iron Warriors, while many Imperial historians claim that realistically the Iron Warriors all but decimated the Imperial Fists. And in part due to this, the brutal contest may never truly become fully agreed upon, but the hatred between those two legions had never burned more fiercely. Though Rogal Dorn would eventually be lost to the Imperium in the grim years following the Horus Heresy, his legacy endures. His chapter sired three rather well-known second founding successor chapters. The Imperial Fists would in essence sire the Crimson Fists, the Black Templars, and the Fists Exemplars. Each of these chapters has earned as many battle honors as entire foundings of Adeptus Astartes created in later centuries. Their deeds etched them into the records of Imperial history due to their courage, which had led them to prove themselves in battlefields spanning the galaxy over. The Imperial Fists remain to this day paragons of the Codex Astartes, exemplars of what it means to be a space marine, barring one or two deviations. For 10,000 years, they have stood as an unyielding shield for the Emperor and for humanity, the bulwark against which traitors and Xenos alike have been shattered. Their steadfastness, passed down directly from Rogal Dorn himself, has been both their greatest strength and their grievous burden. Time and time again they have refused to retreat even when logic or caution would suggest otherwise, pulling victories from the jaws of defeat at a terribly high cost, as the Imperial Fists have been pushed to the edge of extinction multiple times. Dorn's legacy of courage, sacrifice, and his indomitable will continues to drive the Imperial Fists to this day, ensuring their place as one of the Imperium's greatest defenders. Now with the overview over, we can more closely focus in on the history of the Imperial Fists proper. The Wars of Unification marked a pivotal chapter in the history of the Imperium, for it was during this brutal era that the Emperor began his greatest work, forging humanity's future from the war-torn ashes of Holy Terra. In this time, if the Emperor was the father of the Legiones Astartes, then Terra itself would be its mother, the cradle from which they were wrought. As much as the Emperor's will and intellect shaped these warriors, so too would the scars of Terra's blood-soaked past influence their culture and values, along with the methods of war they would become renowned for. To understand the legacy of the Space Marine Legions, one must first look at Terra's fractured and violent history before the Emperor's proper rise. Old Earth was but a desolate world, steeped in chaos and devoid of hope. Tyrants ruled over the shattered remnants of a once great empire, imposing their brief and brutal orders, often marked by both madness and fleeting ambition. It was a time defined by bloodshed, ignorance, and atrocities, with no light to pierce the endless dark of humanity's crumbling future. It was then that the Emperor, in his unparalleled wisdom, sought to change that, as he rallied the first techno-barbarian tribes under his banner, assembling his early forces. From this foundation, he created the legendary gene-forged Thunder Warriors, and then, with his unmatched foresight, he would craft the Great Legiones Astartes. These genetically enhanced warriors would be his ultimate instrument to subdue Terra, and eventually the galaxy itself. With fire and blood, the Emperor tamed a world ravaged by war, replacing madness with order and despair with enlightenment. It was this newly transformed world that the 7th Legion, later known as the Imperial Fists, was destined to defend. The 7th Legion origins lie deeply within Terra itself. Unlike many of their other brother legions, which drew recruits from specific regions or ethnicities, the 7th was formed from the diverse peoples of Terra's whole. Their earliest battle honor was Roma, which bore witness to their broad recruitment, taking the best from every region wherever they could find them, even going so far as to recruit from regions where other legions had secured the exclusive rights of tithes. The 7th Legion claimed some of the most resilient and determined youths for their ranks in such a manner. These aspirants were chosen not only for their physical endurance, but for their mental fortitude, qualities that would go on to define the Legion, in particular with their relentless discipline and their stalwart determination. Many of these early warriors were of a taciturn nature, speaking little but acting swiftly, decisively, and efficiently. In the crucible of the Unification Wars, these warriors were forged, their identities shaped by both the Emperor's vision and the brutal world that they emerged from. It was this shared legacy that rooted them in Terra's darkest days and illuminated their fate by the Emperor's guiding hand, which would give rise to one of the Imperium's most enduring and stalwart defenders, the 7th Legion, the Sons of Rogal Dorn. Now, despite drawing from all over Terra, there seems to have been some questions, in particular why so many of the recruits of the 7th Legion shared so many traits remains unanswered. Some historians speculate that the Legion's intense and agonizing gene seed activation process may have required a very specific type of candidate, those who could endure specific amounts of overwhelming pain, trauma, along with other issues coming from the transformation. It's possible too that once a pattern of recruitment was established, the Imperial Fists, being rather stubborn, turned it into a tradition, perpetuated without question. Regardless of the reason, the grim and resolute nature of their recruits seemed to perfectly align with the demands placed on the 7th Legion. In warfare, the 7th Legion was primarily concerned with conquest, as in true conquest, not just military victory, like other legions. While all the Emperor's forces fought to expand the Imperium, the Imperial Fists held a broader and more enduring vision. To truly conquer, they believed that one not only had to defeat their enemy, but also hold their territory permanently and ensure its loyalty to the Imperium. Destroying a stronghold or breaking the morale of a population was not enough. Left unchecked, those lands could rebel, or worse, become a vulnerability for enemies to exploit. Victory on the battlefield was merely the first step. This philosophy permeated every action of the 7th Legion. In battle, they would pay any price in blood to secure a decisive victory, but once that victory was won, they turned immediately to consolidation. Their focus was not just on defeating the enemy, but ensuring that what was taken remained firmly in the Imperium's hands. A perfect example of this can be found on the later conquests of ancient Terra. It was the Imperial Fists who brought low the cities of the Crystal Sea and rebuilt them from the rubble. But rather than just rebuild them to substandard livable conditions, they turned the ruins into the mighty fortress of the 5th Circle. In the frozen heights of the Himalayan peaks, the Legion sacrificed 3 entire battalions to crush the witchery of the Windcaller clans. Yet within days of that hard-fought victory, the Imperial Fists began to raise bastions against the icy skies. Across the surface of Terra, the fortifications of the 7th Legion would stand as unwavering reminders of the newly conquered territories. Each fortress was a statement of the Imperium's strength and a clear message that the Imperial Fists would fiercely hold what they won. In just the first decade of their existence, the Imperial Fists constructed 600 citadels across Terra. Legends persist that the dead of the Legion still rest within the foundations of these fortresses, their skulls and blood mingled with the stone and mortar of the cities. Each citadel is not merely a monument to victory, but but rather a tribute to the sacrifice of those who gave their lives for conquest, ensuring that the strength of the Imperium would not just be etched into the land, but deeply rooted within its very foundation. With these fortresses firmly rooted within the lands they had conquered, the 7th Legion's influence ensured that order would spread throughout the newly conquered domains. The presence of these imposing strongholds would also serve as a powerful deterrent against rebellion. The old ways, once woven into the fabric of these societies, would either be replaced, assimilated, or intentionally fall to ruin under the watchful gaze of the Imperial Fists. If dissent simmered, the looming fortifications provided a stark and inevitable answer. Resistance would be met with a swift and crushing retribution. Yet the 7th Legion was more than master builders or guards of fortified domains. At their core, they embodied the Emperor's grand vision of unifying humanity under one rule. They were crusaders of the highest order, and their true purpose was that of conquest. For them, a fortress was simply a solidification of victory, a tangible mark of domination. But conquest, the act of breaking new grounds and bringing rebellious realms to heel, was their true calling. The 7th Legion never lingered long after victory. No sooner had they secured a region and erected their fortifications than they moved on, always advancing the frontiers of the Imperium, then fortifying before moving on, ever hungry for new challenges. Their method of warfare was brutally efficient, utilizing massed shock assaults and overwhelming force. In battle, the full might of the Legion's arsenal was unleashed, with battalions deploying en masse, breaking the enemy lines with the irresistible force of a mighty sledgehammer. One striking example of this method was seen on the plains of Kinstar, where the 5th Battalion launched a devastating assault on the Tri-Sea forces. With 50 war machines arrayed in a deadly arrowhead formation, they would shatter the enemy lines with an assault so fierce that it is said that the dust cloud from the advance blotted out the sun, casting a literal shadow over their enemies. In the underground tunnels of Galblitz, the 7th Legion demonstrated their siege mastery by collapsing the crust above the buried city, then descending into the now exposed tunnels before the very echoes of the explosions had faded. But even in the wake of such destruction, they immediately set out to fortify what they had conquered, replacing the broken with something stronger, more enduring, nigh everlasting. It was through these relentless early campaigns that the 7th Legion earned their name. As witnesses observed the lands falling under the control, as many likened it to an unyielding grip of the Emperor himself, a force that held fast with an unbreakable fist. And this vivid description seemed to resonate deeply with the Emperor himself, who decreed that they would henceforth be the Imperial Fists, in recognition of their unyielding service, going so far as to bestow them with the right to bear the laurels of victory as part of their official heraldry. True to their nature, the newly renamed Imperial Fists would accept these honors with the same stoic resolve that they had always shown, as they would be dutiful and silent, ever focused on their next quest. Now, to further understand the Legion, we must focus in on the Primarch, their Gene-sire Rogal Dorn, as the Primarchs were not merely mortals, but transcended extraplanar beings and embodiments of the extraordinary. Each one held a fragment of the sublime, a part of the unfathomable in their very essence. These traits would become admired and even mirrored to some extent in the warriors of the Space Marine legions. However, even the greatest Space Marine is but a mere shadow when compared to the presence of their towering Primarch. Though born from the genes of humanity, the Primarchs were not human in the traditional sense. Their nature was elevated beyond their genetic origins, and in many cases, the qualities of the Primarchs intensified the unique traits within their respective legions once they met. When a Primarch was reunited with their legion, it seemed a remarkable transformation would always follow. The legion's character would evolve, reflecting the influence of its genetic sire. And in the case of the Imperial Fists, this union brought about not a radical shift, but rather a deepening in the traits that they had long displayed since their inception. The arrival of the Primarch, Rogal Dorn, would serve to amplify their unyielding nature, in particular, their stoicism and their mastery and love of siegecraft. The story of Rogal Dorn is one that reflects many of the other Primarchs, one shaped by both fate and the designs of malevolent forces along with the world's worst mother, as the 20 nascent Primarchs, each a genetic masterpiece, were stolen from the Emperor's laboratories on Terra by Erda, history's worst mother, scattering what amounted to newborns across the vast galaxy by casting them into literal hell. But eventually, each of the Primarchs would arrive on a different world. These worlds, with their unique cultures and environments, would leave indelible imprints on each of the Primarchs, shaping their characters and the future of their legions. Rogal Dorn would be eventually found on the frigid ice world of Inwit, located in the Inwit cluster of Segmentum Tempestus. Inwit's harsh climate, with its biting cold and unyielding ice, forged a culture of resilience and survival, traits which were reflected strongly within Rogal Dorn himself. From these frozen wastes emerged a Primarch whose iron will was within him and served to double down on his unwavering sense of duty, one which would come to define the Imperial Fists themselves. And once Rogal Dorn was brought from Inwit, he would instill the spirit of the world within his legion. Inwit itself was a world as unforgiving as it was ancient, perpetually lying in the twilight of its existence. As the planet's sun was an old and dying star, it wound up casting a feeble red glow over only one side of the world, while the other remained tidally locked in perpetual darkness. Inwit was a place where life clinged on desperately, eking out but the merest existence on the edges of oblivion. The dark side of Inwit was known as the Splintered Land. It was a place of frozen crevasses, towering mountain ranges, and shifting dunes of frost and snow. It was a wilderness. It is a wilderness where survival was a daily battle, shaped not only by the extreme cold, but by the monstrous beasts which roamed this desolate landscape. The people who survived here were hardened, as their bodies and spirits were forged in a crucible of the brutal environment. Beneath the thick, icy crusts lay sluggish seas which flowed swiftly, and its depths were inhabited by pale, sightless creatures that hunted by sensing vibrations in the water. These predators possessed a preternatural thirst for blood, adding yet another layer of danger to the life on this frozen world. High above the icy desolation, ancient space stations and orbital shipyards hovered, casting their gaze upon the cold expanse below. These citadels of the void were relics of a forgotten era, and had been suspended in orbit for so long that records of their construction no longer exist. Their perpetual presence, coupled with the eerie auras that danced around the planet's atmosphere, gave Inwit an air of timelessness, unchanging, eternal, and brutal. The light side of Inwit, however, while not as harsh as the dark, offered little in the way of reprieve. Its landscapes dominated by drift-crusted saline seas and barren rocky expanses, all under the fading red light of a dying sun. It was a world without riches, this half of the seas in essence lifeless or buried, its mountains barren of valuable minerals, the native species so vicious and adapted so perfectly to the harshest conditions that they were a danger to any who challenged them. Yet despite these hardships, Inwit produced something much more valuable than gold and jewels: its people. It was through this crucible that their unrelenting spirit and the strength of the human population would shine, leading them to conquer the star cluster and endure throughout the age of strife. These people, shaped by the unforgiving ice world, were seen as some of the premier survivors of humanity, unyielding, resilient, and fiercely disciplined. It is no surprise, then, that from this world would come Rogal Dorn, the Primarch whose indomitable will and stoic disposition would define the Imperial Fists evermore, and leave an indelible, unshaking mark in the Imperium's history. Though they may seem barbaric by some standards, the warriors of Inwit were far from unsophisticated. Born into a world of unyielding cold and constant threats, they were shaped into individuals who believed weakness was death, not only for the individual, but for their entire kin group. Death on Inwit would take many forms, from ice storms, which could freeze a man solid in seconds, to predators from the splintered lands, from the deepest, darkest shadows of the world's oceans, and even the smallest lapse in vigilance could allow these monstrosities to temporarily breach the warmth seals of a hold, condemning an entire family or multiple families to a frozen tomb of their own creation. This environment made survival paramount, as it was not simply about living to see another day, but ensuring that one's people would endure in a way that strongly mirrors the Imperial Fists. Now, it must be noted that unlike many would come to believe later, the people of Inuit were largely nomadic, moving between subterranean hive cities hewn from ice to trade in the essentials of life: weapons, fuels, advanced technologies, and food. Conflict between these roaming clans was rather commonplace, with young warriors trained in the arts of both defense and conquest from a very young age, as they would not simply learn how to fight, but they would learn how to thrive in the most unforgiving of environments, to measure the value of every resource, and to adapt or take by force the knowledge that they needed from others. Long before the Emperor's rise on Terra, the people of Inuit had begun to reach for the stars, knowing that humanity was born to inherit the stars. As their empire expanded, with each world they took, they assimilated what was useful and realigned local resources to reinforce their positions, leading their empire to expand. But Inuit itself, its cold, its challenges, its relentless drive for survival remained unchanged, becoming the harsh heart of a small stellar realm, and the crucible from which generations of great warriors and leaders were forged. And it would be here where Rogal Dorn's gestation pod would land. As here, in the ice hives of Inuit, with their unyielding hardships and ever-present clan disputes persisted, despite the technological advances of the world, even as starships were birthed and orbital weapon stations were used to conquer other planets. Inuit's rulers would hold as steadfast to ancient customs and traditions as possible, since they saw them as the very ways that they had forged their strength. As warlords and matriarchs who commanded entire armies amongst the stars would live lives little different from their vassals, embracing the same cold rigors that shaped the people's endurance. So it was then, and so it remains today. It was within this austere and unrelenting world that Rogal Dorn would grow into manhood, and eventually, as most of the Primarchs, he would rise to rulership. However, he did not merely inherit the power of the Inuit cluster, he earned it through trials as harsh as the frozen world itself. Much of Dorn's childhood remains somewhat shrouded in mystery, or at least it's seldom spoken in any consistent fashion. What is certain, however, is that from the cold desolation of Inuit, a boy named Rogal Dorn was raised by House Dorn, and he would come to lead the Ice Caste and eventually govern the entire Inuit cluster as its emperor. One notable tale from this was of the Primarch's adopted clan. In particular, a man of great wisdom and strength within the clan would become a surrogate grandfather to him, imprinting the arts of strategy, tactics, and leadership. Even after discovering that he shared no blood with the man who had raised him, Dorn maintained a profound respect for the man who had become his, in essence, parent. In a poignant reminder to this bond, Dorn has kept a fur-edged robe belonging to his grandfather, and he would continuously sleep with the robe draped across his bed every night until his disappearance. Dorn's personal qualities, in particular his disciplined nature and his tactical brilliance, along with his commitment towards duty, aligned with the harsh values shared from his homeworld, in particular from his grandfather's clan. And under his leadership, the Inuit cluster's empire would expand further than ever before, as he meticulously organized and trained his armies, shaping them into forces of nigh unparalleled strength within the region. Moreover, Dorn's technological acumen led to the creation of spacecraft which were far superior to those that had come before it, advancing his people's influence and power across the stars. In many ways, Rogal Dorn was the living embodiment of Inuit, cold, unyielding, and fiercely disciplined, but loyal to his family. His rise to power did not mark a divergence from the world that had raised him, but rather a continuation of its values and an amplification of it by his extraordinary capabilities. Dorn would take these qualities with him as he would eventually be reunited with the Emperor, once becoming a stalwart leader of the Imperial Fists, whose new roots would be forged with the same discipline and icy exterior. Do not look to us for kindness. Do not look to us for hope. We are not the kind children of this new age. We are the rocks of its foundation. If you seek hope, then look to what we create. If you seek kindness, turn to those who will follow in our footsteps. Excerpt from Rogal Dorn, addressed to the collected 300 magistrates of Terra. 40 standard years after the death of his adopted grandfather, the distant imperial ships of the Great Crusade would finally reach the hives of Inuit in 835 M30. This monumental event marked the reunion of Rogal Dorn with the true emperor, his father. In this moment, the Emperor regained not just a long-lost son, but the potential of a star-spanning society that had already been meticulously shaped into a formidable tool of war. Dorn greeted the Emperor aboard the Phalanx, an immense ship constructed during the Dark Age of technology, which in large part had been fixed under his guidance once it was unearthed from within Inuit's region of space. With this encounter, Dorn became the 7th of the 20 Primarchs to be discovered by their father. The Emperor welcomed Dorn with open arms, embracing him as a son reunited from the shadows of history. And even though he was gifted the Phalanx, he would entrust it back into Dorn's care, after transforming it into a fortress-monastery for the 7th Space Marine Legion, a legion which had been crafted from Dorn's own genetic template, making it a living testament to his legacy and in essence, biological children to him. This moment was not only significant for their reunion, but it heralded the dawn of a new chapter, a new saga for humanity, as the Emperor and Dorn would be prepared to embark on the next phase of the Great Crusade, and it would become quickly evident that their bond would not merely shape the Imperial Fists, but it would also resonate deeply with the Imperium itself. Together, they would stand as bulwarks against the ever-encroaching darkness, forging a path forward amidst the turmoil of an unforgiving galaxy. From the very moment Rogal Dorn had met the Emperor on the bridge of the Phalanx, he had pledged his unwavering loyalty, never once seeking favor from his gene-sire. Dorn would epitomize humanity's relentless pursuit for truth, as he could not even tell a lie if he so desired, even when such a falsehood may have served his cause. And to many this would come off as obtuse. However, this unwavering integrity would be memorialized in stone, in particular as Dorn's statue stands as one of only 4 erected on Macragge, standing right alongside Reboot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines. As commander of the 7th Legion and its expeditionary fleets, Dorn displayed an unparalleled devotion for military acumen, as he was renowned for possessing one of the foremost brilliant minds, in particular regarding any military aspect, amongst his brethren. His strategies were marked by a meticulous order and discipline, which rivaled even the mighty Perturabo. Dorn's records of achievement during the Great Crusade is rather vast, as the War Master Horus held Dorn and the Imperial Fists in such high esteem that he believed that if the Imperial Fists, the Masters of Defense, were to occupy a fortress against the Luna Wolves, famed for their assault tactics, the ensuing conflict would likely delve into an unending and unrelenting stalemate. This respect was not merely reflective of Dorn and his legion, but also of the pivotal role they had been chosen to play for the Imperium's existence. Rogal Dorn was known as a figure of nigh singular determination, his energy always focused, singularly yet tempered by a reserved, stoic nature. While many observers have noted the grim and seemingly emotionless disposition of both Dorn and his legion, such assessments seem to overlook the depth of his character. Beneath the calm exterior seemed to lie a formidable presence, which, when provoked, Dorn's wrath was shown to be as terrifying as it was powerful, capable of shaking the very foundations of even the most resilient individual's resolve. During the harrowing resurgence of the Zanchian breed in the Adonis cluster, Dorn's cold fury was instrumental in maintaining the battlements while wielding influence as a formidable weapon, which his sons learned to mirror, going so far as his admonishments of the reinforcements at Castoris being so resonant that it seemed to echo from the skies to the still burning seas. Leman Russ of the Space Wolves Legion famously described him as swift and unforgiving as the falling edge of an axe. Yet Dorn's complexity extended beyond mere martial prowess. He was prone to brooding, allowing his worries to fester beneath his stoic facade. Although he epitomized absolute loyalty as a warrior, Dorn was also a true idealist. For him, the principles underlying his battles were significant as the victories themselves. This duality of purpose as a warrior and an idealist defined not only his character, but the very essence of the Imperial Fists as they forged their legacy throughout the Great Crusade. During the Great Crusade itself, the true depths of Rogal Dorn's character largely would remain obscured from view. Only a select few who knew him intimately might have glimpsed the complexity of his more critical moments, such as his near-fatal encounter with Conrad Kurz of the Night Lord's Legion in the Charut system, and a brief schism with Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, following an especially brutal campaign. It was only in the aftermath of the catastrophic events of the Horus Heresy, when the Imperium lay in ruins and its blood-soaked history etched forever in grief, that a more nuanced understanding of the man would emerge. This period revealed that even the most steadfast of loyalty can harbor an inherent flaw. A truth which resonated throughout the ages, as at the time the Imperial Fists' union with Rogal Dorn did remain strong. The specter of potential betrayal still loomed ominously in the future. However, the integration of Rogal Dorn with the Imperial Fist was one of the more seamless and profound of all the Primarchs and their legions. The ideals of the Imperium and overreaching purpose of the Great Crusade resonated harmoniously with Rogal Dorn's own intrinsic motivations and ambitions. The warriors of the Imperial Fists embodied not only the achievements that he had forged in Inuit, but also represented the vision that he harbored for their shared future. Thus, despite all this, the legacy was strengthened due to their interactions rather than in spite of it. From the very first moment Dorn encountered his Genesons, he demanded from them the same unwavering commitment he expected from himself. Upon meeting Legion Master Mathis and the veteran contingents of the Imperial Fists, Dorn maintained a profound silence, even as they knelt before him in solemn fealty. Only after observing their prowess in battle did he finally break his silence, conveying his expectations with a stark clarity. He proclaimed that they had as much to accomplish as they had to learn. To Mathis, he offered a single, heartfelt word of thanks for his dedicated service and elevated him to the esteemed position of High Castellan of the Inuit cluster. This honor carried with it a heavy responsibility, as Dorn's next in command was to rise 30 regiments of Imperial Fists from the Inuit system. Without pausing to reflect, Rogal Dorn and his Genesons launched back into the Crusades, despite being separated for so long. Over the course of the next 16 solar decades, the Imperial Fists would emerge as some of the most fierce warriors in the Imperium. They seemed to shine on the burning frontiers of the Great Crusade in particular. Relentlessly, they would surge from one war zone to another, earning the admiration of their brother legions and rising in the esteem of many across the Imperium. Their martial methods reflected the hard-earned lessons of Inuit, coupled with the echoes of the 7th Legion's previous victories. As they advanced, they would fortify. As they would fortify, they would advance and construct defenses to secure their conquests. Yet they refused to linger on as rulers. While a Castellan and a contingent of Astartes warriors might remain to oversee the defenses of a newly acquired world, they did not take on the role of administrators or lawmakers. The Imperial Fists understood their purpose precisely. They were warriors of the Imperium, not overlords. Their existence was defined by service in war and their willingness to lay down their lives for the Imperium's survival. What they did seek from each world they conquered were new recruits, warriors to join their ranks, alongside the ongoing struggle for humanity's future. One notable instance of the Imperial Fists' commitment to their purpose could be traced to the Imperial compliance on the now renowned world of Necromunda, where they secured a significant victory against the Orcs in the treacherous ash wastes of the Hive World. In recognition of their valor, the Hive Worlds graciously consented to allow recruits to be drawn from their populace. A fortress chapel would be constructed on the world, yet the Imperial Fists maintained their positions in essence as esteemed guests rather than conquerors. Rogal Dorn explicitly sought no special privileges on the worlds from which the Imperial Fists recruited, unlike the other Primarchs, such as the ever-increasingly volatile Perturabo, who seized every opportunity to establish a garrison and claim tithes from newly acquired territories. Dorn declared, "I want recruits, not vassals." He was contented to keep his legion focused solely on military endeavors, shunning the civil and political responsibilities that accompanied the governance of a legion homeworld. Through the Great Crusade, the Imperial Fists would serve primarily as a strategic reserve for many of the Emperor's forces, a testament to their ability to rapidly deploy onto critical battlefields aboard the legendary Phalanx, along with their meticulous planning and adaptability allowing them to excel as urban combatants along with siege specialists, earning a rather formidable reputation within the Imperium. Following numerous campaigns that resulted in the annexation of thousands of worlds into the Imperium, the Emperor returned to Terra in order to establish a central capital from which to govern his burgeoning empire. And he would bring the Imperial Fists with him, designating them as his protectors and entrusting Rogal Dorn with the critical task of constructing the defenses of the Imperial Palace. This monumental assignment did not go unnoticed by the other Primarchs. In particular, Perturabo, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, was incensed upon learning that Dorn believed that his Imperial Palace could withstand even the mightiest assaults from the siege specialists of his own legion. His rage would erupt into a torrent of unfounded accusations and vitriol, leaving even his own followers and allies speechless at the ferocity of the outburst. In the aftermath, communications between Dorn and Perturabo became scarce, and their respective legions would not serve alongside each other in any future campaigns. While the Imperial Fists would remain steadfast at the Emperor's side, the Iron Warriors became integral to Horus's vanguard, for reasons that would become clear later, setting the stage for future conflicts and rivalries within the Imperium. While one would think similarity may encourage understanding and camaraderie, in the 41st millennium it seems to often end up rather negatively. This is exemplified in particular by the relationship between Rogal Dorn and his else-while brother, Perturabo, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors. Though they shared a myriad of striking parallels, both were often seen as reserved to the point of being almost statue-like, and being rather unyielding and unbreakable in their convictions, all the while being some of the greatest artisans of war in all of creation. And while at first glance, many would believe that their shared mutual traits would breed some amount of kinship, it seems quite the opposite would happen, as records show that even from their first meeting, there seemed to be a great amount of animosity between the two. However, the precise origins of said animosity is unknown to anybody but the two. A closer examination would reveal a rather troubling pattern of behavior, which indicates that rather than fostering understanding and a good-natured competitive spirit, their shared traits often served to make their differences more glaring, driving a wedge deeper into a rather fragile relationship. And it was these differences which further drove their conflicts, as while both Dorn and Perturabo favored siege warfare, their methodologies could not be more different. Perturabo's approach was marked by brutal directness while employing overwhelming merciless force and being willing to sustain horrific, nigh unacceptable casualties in order to achieve victory at a greater pace. In contrast, Rogal Dorn, while willing to pay a significantly higher price for triumph than some other Primarchs, sought to minimize unnecessary losses of life, only accepting casualties when casualties were part of the only acceptable outcome, viewing them as a last resort rather than a strategy. Dorn's idealism stood in stark contrast to Perturabo's rather pragmatic and mechanical view of things, furthering the rift between the two, which would deepen throughout the entirety of the Great Crusade, and it would become worse as time went on, and Perturabo would be pushed to more and more dangerous fronts, in large part due to his own successes, allowing him to see a contrast in how he and Dorn would be treated. Amongst the many battles that the nascent Imperium fought during the Great Crusade, few stand out as prominently as the monumental triumph achieved against the single largest Orc empire ever encountered. This pivotal conflict, known as the Ulnar Crusade during M30, represented a formidable imperial offensive against Orc warlord Uruk and his interstellar Orc Empire. The final assault would occur on the capital world of this Orc stellar empire, situated within the central Ulnar system of the galaxy's Ulnar sector. The scale of the crusade is one which could only be referred to as staggering, as it involved the deployment of well over 100,000 Space Marines, supplemented by a mind-boggling 8 million Imperial troops, along with thousands of Armada Imperialis starships, along with their accompanying support personnel. This extensive mobilization showed how important it was to defeat the Orcs at Ulnar, and how mighty of a triumph it was. The Orcs of Ulnar represented the single largest concentration of greenskins ever vanquished by the raw military might of the Imperium of Man prior to the outbreak of the Third War for Armageddon in the 41st millennium. The successful defeat of the Ulnar Orcs not only showcased the tactical prowess of the Imperial forces, but would also mark a solidification of the Emperor's status as a unifier of humanity, as following this decisive victory, the Emperor would return to Terra, where he would embark on the monumental task of operating and opening his own version of the Eldari webway for humanity's utilization. In the Emperor's absence, the command of the vast forces of the Great Crusade would fall onto Horus, as the Ulnar Crusade would mark a significant turning point in Horus's career and the history of the galaxy, as he would be granted the newly established title of War Master, marking him as a supreme commander of all imperial armies who were not directly under the control of the Emperor. This new role bestowed upon Horus granted him extensive authority over his fellow Primarchs, along with each and every expeditionary fleet in the ongoing campaigns across the galaxy. In the wake of this promotion, Horus Lupercal sought counsel and insight from his fellow Primarch brothers regarding the monumentous change. This elevation not only set him apart and made him first amongst equals, but it also raised him above all his brothers, stirring a rather complex mix of emotions. Some had muted objections, along with thinly veiled discontent, especially amongst those who felt the title rightfully belonged to them. Despite their status as paragons of war, the Primarchs would be shown to not be immune to the oh-so-human flaw of a sibling rivalry along with petty competition, exhibiting some of their most human-like traits in their interactions after this event. This would lead to Horus acting with the assistance of his Eliquary, Molgust. Horus would work diligently in order to court the favor of his brothers, as he aimed to quell any fears or doubts along with reaffirming allegiances and generally securing their cooperation, as at this moment he viewed it as essential that none of the brothers felt openly slighted or overlooked, and he hoped that each Primarch would recognize their importance within the grand scheme of the Imperium. While some like Sanguinius, Lorgar, and Fulgrim had already openly acclaimed Horus's elevation, others were more reluctant and showed vehement hostility. These were Angron and Perturabo, who largely expressed their fury in the new shape of the hierarchy. This would prompt Horus to act, primarily focusing on the diplomatic avenues to mitigate resentment and jealousy. In contrast, figures such as Lehman Russ and Lionel Johnson would remain cynical, yet not openly hostile towards Horus's new position, displaying little surprise in the Emperor's decision, but each believing that their own elevation to said role would have been better, at least in their view. In contrast, others like Rabut Guilliman, Jagatai Khan, and Rogal Dorn accepted this new order with grace, recognizing the Emperor's choice as both just and inevitable. They understood that Horus had always been the brightest amongst them, the first to shine in the Emperor's eyes, and their confidence in his suitability for the role stemmed from an awareness that none of the other Primarchs had ever matched his remarkable achievements or his profound bond with the Emperor. In this volatile environment, the seeds of rivalry had been sown, but it seems Rogal Dorn had held his head high and maintained an even keel amongst his brothers. And in part it was due to this that in his quest for guidance, following his elevation to War Master, Horus Lupercal would seek counsel from his two most steadfast brothers, Rogal Dorn and Reboot Guilliman, both embodying the pinnacles of imperial ideals, as they led their respective legions with unmatched dedication and military acumen which could potentially put even Horus's to shame. To Horus, their approval was akin to a younger sibling seeking the endorsement of his more accomplished brothers. Following his promotion, Dorn would arrive at the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet at Horus's invitation, facilitating a critical dialogue regarding the new responsibilities and the scope of the powers that the War Master would now hold. Being seen as the finest of military intellects amongst the Primarchs, Dorn's strategic mind was more linear and, in a way, just as disciplined as Guilliman's. Moreover, Dorn's mind retained the flexibility necessary for inspired decision-making, which greatly aided Horus's reordering of the Primarchs and how the campaigns would move on with his new position, as Dorn's record during the Great Crusade was realistically second only to Horus and potentially the Lion. Yet where Horus was flamboyant and charismatic, Dorn remained resolute and reserved. This distinction underscored the rationale why Horus chose to seek counsel from his brother. This goes so far as Horus once remarking that if I were to besiege a fortress held by you, the conflict would last an eternity, with the best offensive met by the best defensive. This exchange showed how highly Horus held Dorn's strategic intellect, as at this moment these titans of war would shape the ongoing path of the Great Crusade, each playing a pivotal role in not only crafting, but implementing the Imperium's new offensive as it spread relentlessly throughout the stars. As the Great Crusade would commence once again, Rogal Dorn and the Imperial Fists, paragons of loyalty and martial prowess, would earn the esteemed favor of the Emperor, as their unwavering reliability made them invaluable, often summoned to reinforce faltering campaigns and to secure crumbling fronts, along with to shatter stagnant stalemates and drawn-out sieges, as the Emperor would frequently call upon Rogal Dorn and his sons to stand by his side in battle, which would be an honor that statistically was bestowed upon the Imperial Fists far more than any other legion. A striking illustration of this would occur on the assault on Ophelia 8, where the Emperor led a formidable cadre of 100 custodies and 100,000 Imperial Fists into the fray. In another crucial campaign, the Emperor summoned not only Horus and the Luna Wolves, but also Dorn of the Imperial Fists to form a vanguard against the shrouded dynasties, once again showing the great favor that the Imperial Fists and their Primarch had earned. Time and time again, the Imperial Fists would respond to the Emperor's summons, executing his will with unwavering dedication, while other Primarchs and their legions may have carried out more illustrious campaigns and expanded the Imperial truth across countless worlds. The Imperial Fists stood as the foundation rock upon which the Imperium of Man was built. Despite their esteemed status and accolades, reverence did not seem to sit well with all of the brother legions. It was well documented that there was no end of animosity between the Imperial Fists and the Iron Warriors, and while Perabo's disdain reached its zenith, it seemed other Primarchs also harbored discontent with the trust placed upon Dorn and his sons. Rogal Dorn's forthright nature often seemed to exacerbate tensions between, as his panache for unvarnished truths and his uncompromising ideals, though admirable, frequently led to much unnecessary friction between his peers. It was this very trait that likely influenced the Emperor's decision to overlook Dorn as War Master upon withdrawing from the Great Crusade. In contrast to Dorn's straightforwardness, Horus seemed to excel in diplomacy, being rather adept in forging alliances and maintaining harmony amongst the fractious forces of the Primarchs. Where Dorn risked division, Horus fostered unity. Where Dorn rejected compromise, Horus sought to accommodate all. Yet even as Horus assumed control of the Great Crusade, Dorn would be given a grandiose appointment. He would be made the Praetorian of Terra and designated the Defender of the Throne World. In this pivotal role, the Imperial Fists would serve as the garrison force, protecting Terra while Horus advanced the Imperium's ambitious campaigns. With this decision, it seemed the trajectory of the Emperor and his sons would be irrevocably altered, setting the stage for one of the greatest conflicts, which was led by a large amount of enmity spawning from this decision. Before the Imperial Fists could reach Terra in full strength, they would be in large part ensnared in the catastrophic opening shots of the Horus Heresy, as they would be stranded in large part in the void for an extended period of time due to the violent warp storms that heralded Horus's rebellion. The Imperial Fists fleet would ultimately encounter the severely damaged loyalists of the Death Guard frigate known as the Eisenstein. This vessel had narrowly escaped the infamous Isstvan III atrocity, bringing grave news of Horus's betrayal. Initially, Rogal Dorn met these claims by Nathaniel Garro with great skepticism, nearly resorting to violence when Garro revealed that his brother Primarch, Horus, had turned traitor against the Imperium and the Emperor. However, as more survivors from the Eisenstein, which included Captain Garro, Lacton Quds of the Luna Wolves, and the Remembrancer, Euphrates Keeler, who would later become an Imperial Saint, urged him to accept the shocking revelation, as Dorn's disbelief would now wane. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Dorn would swiftly mobilize the large majority of his legion, directing them towards the Isstvan system on a war footing, as he made the decision to take what was left and return to Terra, in particular with his veteran Space Marine company, determined to personally deliver the harrowing news of Horus's betrayal directly to his father, as the fate of the Imperium now hung in the balance and the Imperial Fists seemed poised to play one of the more pivotal roles in the unfolding tragedy. In the wake of the schism of Mars during the Horus Heresy, loyalists on the Red Planet found their salvation in the formidable Imperial Expeditionary Fleet, as Malcador the Sigillite, the regent of Terra, had entrusted Rogal Dorn with a mission of paramount significance to secure the forges of Mars for the Imperial war effort post-haste. In response, Dorn announced his intention to deploy a force led by Legion Champion and First Captain, the legendary Sigismund, accompanied by 4 companies of Imperial Fists and a substantial contingent of Imperial Auxilia. The target of this operation was an arc of loyalist-controlled territory in Mars, in particular within the Northern Hemisphere, specifically the critical munitions manufactura of Mundus Gamma and Mundus Oculum. These vast industrial complexes were essential to the Mechanicum's production of weaponry and power armor for the Legiones Astartes, and Dorn planned for his forces to strike swiftly and harshly, capturing these vital forges and then expanding their control outwards, all the while securing additional facilities with minimal damage to the facilities themselves. Sigismund's companies made their landing to Mundus Oculum as the broader Imperial Expeditionary Forces engaged in fierce battles across Mars's rugged terrain. Amidst the chaos, 13 companies of the Imperial Army's Saturnine hoplites advanced under heavy fire towards the traitor lines encircling the Forge Expixven Maximo. As the stakes were high and the outcome of this mission would significantly impact the Imperial war effort in the ongoing struggle of the Horus Heresy and against Horus and the traitors, there would be no compromise. They had to win, regardless of the costs. Further south on the Red Planet, 2 companies of Imperial Fists, alongside 4 regiments of Jovian Genodries, totaling nearly 15,000 Imperial Army soldiers, descended upon the Mundus Gamma Forge complex, under the command of Captain Cambia Diaz. However, the mission's outcome would veer drastically from expectations. As soon as they landed, Camban Diaz and Jovan's regiments found themselves ensnared in a desperate battle for survival. The Saturnine hoplites, tasked with breaking the siege at Eopsian Maximo's forge, faced relentless resistance from the grotesquely transformed weapon creatures of the Dark Mechanicum. The horrors of this conflict would push both forces to their limits, as ancient weapons would become demon engines, and god machines would be corrupted with the all-encompassing power derived from the warp. And technology previously deemed heretical would be used openly in battlefields once again. However, despite the odds being stacked against him, with his company outnumbered a staggering 100 to 1, Cambion Diaz managed to secure the armor forges and the ammunition silos on Mundus Gamma. Yet, as the traitor forces pressed their advantage, Camba Diaz's troops were forced back towards the landing fields, suffering grievous losses in the process. Meanwhile, Sigismund, aware of the dire situation, understood that the Imperial expeditionary forces could not hold the forge for long. Nonetheless, they had successfully secured a substantial cache of essential supplies for transit to Terra. When Sigismund's companies arrived in Mundus Oculum, they were uncertain about the challenges that lay ahead. But to their relief, they discovered that fabricator Locum Zacharias Kane had remained loyal to the Imperium, facilitating their efforts greatly. Sigismund's forces would acquire vast quantities of munitions for transport, and a rather impressive stockpile of Astartes weaponry. However, time was not on their side, and despite the dedicated efforts of Kane's servitors working tirelessly, they could not complete the preparations quick enough. Sigismund's shipmates alerted him to the looming threat on the periphery of the warfront. A formidable enemy force was rapidly closing in, comprising of infantry, armored vehicles, Skitarii, and at least 2 traitor Titan legions, totaling a nigh unimaginable 60 war engines. The clock for Sigismund and his forces was now ticking. Caught in the tumultuous struggle between his thirst for vengeance against the traitors and his mission bestowed upon him by his Primarch, Sigismund would now face a daunting reality. The rebellious forces which were arrayed against him were rather formidable, and while his desire for retribution burned fiercely, the imperative was to secure the vital armor and weaponry from Kane's forge post-haste. These supplies would be essential for the future defense of the Imperial Palace. Despite the fury coursing through him, the first captain understood the gravity of his situation, and his orders would be clear. Pursuing reckless acts of defiance would not serve the Imperium's interests. As he weighed his options, Locum Kane impressed upon Sigismund the critical stakes that were involved. Should both Mundus Oculum and Mundus Gamma forges succumb to the traitors, the Imperium would find itself unable to effectively replenish their combat losses, which would be sustained in the inevitable conflicts to come. Thus, with the weight of heavy responsibility upon his shoulders, Sigismund steeled himself to remain focused on the mission, recognizing that true loyalty to the Emperor would require both discipline and strategic foresight. In a mere span of a few solar hours, the forges of Mundus Oculum and Mundus Gamma would be engulfed in flames, their vast industrial machinery and manufacturing capabilities forcefully reduced to smoldering ruins. The implications of such devastating losses of not just technology but knowledge would resonate throughout the Imperium for millennia to come, as knowledge, technology, expertly trained personnel, and the sheer fabrication capabilities of these facilities would in essence never be replaced or replicated. As the chaos of war unfolded, Imperial starships would launch from the surface of Mars like comets, striking out into the void. Astartes along with Imperial army vessels would even collide in a desperate scramble to escape the red planet's now war-torn grasp. Ultimately, fewer than 1,000 loyalist warriors would manage to break free before the Manufactorum succumbed to traitor control. Despite the dire circumstances, the vigilant rearguard of Astartes and other loyalist forces would not have their efforts be in vain. Their sacrifice, numbering in the thousands, secured tens of thousands of newly fabricated Mark IV armor, along with multiple pallets of Mark V, along with other crucial materials. These supplies would ultimately prove pivotal in the Imperium's struggle against the treacherous legions led by Horus Lupercal, making it a bittersweet victory for the Imperial Fists amidst overwhelming losses. As the Horus Heresy raged on throughout the galaxy, Rogal Dorn and his Imperial Fists would undertake the monumental task of reinforcing the Imperium's defenses of Terra and the Sol system as a whole in anticipation for the War Master's relentless onslaught, with the traitor legions at the War Master's side, now outnumbering the remaining loyalists. It would be through Dorn and his son's efforts that Terra would be transformed into an unparalleled bastion of martial might. Yet the main fortress would be distinguished by two walls: the walls within and the walls without. The walls within represented the gateway from the Imperial dungeon to the Emperor's cryptic Great Project. Here, the Master of Mankind would stand resolutely at the forefront, flanked by his esteemed custodians and the rather mysterious Sisters of Silence, guardians of the Emperor's great secrets. Conversely, the walls without would be encompassed by the extensive defense spheres radiating from the Imperial Palace outwards, extending into the void just beyond the Sol system. At this outer perimeter stood Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, commanding his stalwart Imperial Fists, as the integrity of both walls was paramount in their planning. Should either falter, the very foundation of the Imperium would crumble, along with humanity's hopes for liberation from the forces which were now set to claim their souls. And this defense of the Sol system, in particular the strategic spheres that Rogal Dorn created, would be maintained as echoes throughout history due to how functionally incredible they were, in vastly decreasing the advantages held by the traitor legions. The Imperial Fists meticulously stratified the defenses into independently codependent spheres. The sphere's command would be entrusted to senior Imperial Fists who were elevated to the rank of Lord Castellan, each selected by Dorn himself. This structure not only exemplified Dorn's strategic acumen, but also embodied the relentless resolve the Imperial Fists held to protect humanity's last stronghold against the ever-encroaching tides of treachery. Though the Imperial Fists' multi-layered defense would protect many human strongholds throughout the Sol system, it was particularly designed in a multi-layered system in order to hold off the traitor legions from reaching Terra. The first sphere, which was the outermost layer of this formidable structure, was commanded by the ever indomitable hero known as Sigismund. Following him would be the legendary Helbrecht, in control of the second sphere, not to be confused with Helbrecht of the Black Templars. And the third sphere would be under the command of Ifrid, who would effectively encircle the Martian battlesphere, successfully containing the treacherous Jark Mechanicum tech priests. At the heart of this defense stood Rogal Dorn himself, overseeing the direct protection of Terra. The Imperial Fists would be meticulously distributed amongst these spheres and supplemented by thousands of warships, along with void defenses and millions of mortal soldiers. However, the vast distances between each sphere posed a significant challenge. Signals dispatched from one command to another would take solar hours to traverse the millions of kilometers separating them, since Vox communications could now be intercepted by the traitors, necessitating more rustic forms of communication. When the anticipated traitor invasion finally erupted, the communications would occur via signals derived from Morse code using astropathic flares, rather than a traditional astropathic wire. This was due to the instantaneous nature of how swiftly these messages would be transmitted, though the complexity of said messages was markedly limited by comparison. And eventually, the urgent signal would convey the chilling news that the traitors had breached the defenses of Sol on the Fire Mountains, which, to all who understood it, knew that humanity now faced extinction as it stood on a knife's edge between oblivion and hell itself. And the Imperial Fists knew they would have to move to defend their last bastion against the forces of betrayal. As the Imperium as a whole descended into civil war, the Alpha Legion would demonstrate a remarkable maneuverability through this unrelenting chaos. Utilizing vast networks of operatives and agents, they adeptly transferred war material and personnel across sectors, largely unnoticed, including into the strategically critical Segmentum Solar, in particular, right into the heart of the Sol system. Through their relentless efforts, the Imperial Fists had transformed the Sol system into a nigh impregnable fortress, meticulously organizing each layer into a formidable defense designed to thwart the impending assault by the War Master Horus. However, it seems that Dorn did not take into account the Alpha Legion, who in part had been driven by their insatiable need to prove the superiority of their own tactics, sought not only to brazenly breach Terra's outer defenses, but to execute a stunning humiliation of the Imperial Fists. Their audacious goal was to infiltrate the most secure location within the galaxy, the Imperial Palace itself. This would occur by activating dormant assets hidden within Terra for decades, as the Alpha Legion would achieve what no other faction had managed before, to successfully deploy several agents within the Imperial Palace, particularly within the Investory. This was a hallowed space which was adorned with towering statues commemorating the Primarchs of the 20 Space Marine Legions. I mean, there's only ever been 18 legions, so these statues were to commemorate the 18 Primarchs, along with the Space Marine Legions and other heroes of the Great Crusade. In this critical juncture of the Solar War, the very foundation of the Imperium's strength seemed to be threatened from within rather than without. For an extended period of time, 2 planets within the Investory remained devoid of their original statues, monuments to the lost Primarchs, whose there were no lost Primarchs, whose legacies were definitely not obliterated, their histories not erased from the records of the Imperium. In stark contrast, the statues of the 9 Primarchs, who would eventually betray the Emperor, were simply shrouded, as their identities would remain concealed, yet present. In a bold operation, they had infiltrated and breached the sanctuary, dismantling the statues of all but 2 Primarchs, Alfarius, the Master of Deception, and Rogal Dorn, the Steadfast Protector and Praetorian of Terra, before leaving. This act was not merely one of destruction, but also one that would send a calculating message to Dorn as a challenge to the Imperial Fists and an assertion of the Alpha Legion's dominance in warfare. The audacity of this operation would be compounded by the fact that it was executed in secrecy and hidden from the various adepti within the Imperial Palace. Even Malcador the Sigillite, the Regent of Terra, and the Emperor's elite bodyguard, the Legio Custodes, were prohibited from entering the Investory, thereby remaining unaware of the humiliation that had been done to them and what had befallen the many statues of the Imperium's greatest warriors. However, eventually Malcador would become aware of the Alpha Legion's infiltration, yet how he became aware of it exactly remains an unsolved mystery. Yet Rogal Dorn was resolute in his determination to confront the treacherous 20th Legion in due course. In the aftermath of this act of sabotage, an Alpha Legion fleet commanded by Harrowmaster Clysenius launched an assault of the outermost defenses of the Sol system. This fleet succeeded in capturing several of the moons of Pluto, which were strategically significant within the defense perimeter. The exact event and steps which were followed during this assault remain a closely guarded secret, known only to Rogal Dorn and his Huskarl bodyguard. This secret seemed to loom largely over the Praetorian, in particular due to the repercussions that it may have in the unfolding Solar War, as it seems a harbinger of further treachery was brewing even within Dorn's own well-defended Imperial domain. In a calculated bid to distract the beleaguered Imperial defenders from their true objective, Pluto, which was a crucial linchpin in the Loyalists' surveillance network within the Sol system, the Alpha Legion executed a series of brutal acts of murder sabotage upon multiple planets almost simultaneously, as Rogal Dorn would now have to grapple with these diversionary attacks led by Alfarius, which consisted of over 200 vessels advancing towards Pluto and its moons, Charon, Kerberos, Nyx, Styx, and ultimately Hydra. Upon their arrival, the Alpha Legion ignited further uprisings orchestrated by infiltrator teams embedded throughout the Sol system. Their primary target was, ironically enough, Hydra, a fortified moon which housed a critical astropathic monitoring station. Alfarius himself spearheaded this assault. In contrast, the Loyalist defenders would be under the command of First Captain Sigismund, who mustered a mere paltry 30 void ships to counter the overwhelming assault of the Alpha Legion's fleet. The ensuing battle would be catastrophic for the Imperial Fists, who were caught off guard by the relentless barrage. The now outnumbered legionaries suffered devastating losses, which were exacerbated by fire ships concealed within the Alpha Legion's ranks, who would be unleashed to wreak havoc upon the defenders. As Kerberos fell to the enemy's control, it unleashed a destructive rain upon Charon, Nyx, and Styx, employing heavy weaponry to decimate the already strained Loyalist positions. Despite these overwhelming odds, the Imperial Fists, embodying the tenets of loyalty and valor, along with their steadfast nature, would hold their ground against all odds, as this overwhelming onslaught would not cause them to break. Their steadfastness amidst this chaos would soon be tested further, for the outcome of the Battle of Pluto would hold significant ramifications for the fate of the Sol System and the Imperium itself. As the battle raged on, Archimedes, master of the Huskars under Rogal Dorn, discerned the Alpha Legion's true objective: to dismantle the Imperial astropathic monitoring network centered on Hydra. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Archimus rallied a contingent of Huskarls for a bold assault against the Alpha Legion, confronting the forces led by the Primarch Alpharius. In the midst of this fierce engagement, the Huskarls fought valiantly, yet suffered grievous losses. Archimus would be mortally wounded. As hopes waned, the traitor forces appeared to gain the upper hand. Yet it seemed the tide of battle would shift unexpectedly, as from the depths of space the Imperial Fists' mobile star fortress, the Phalanx, would make its dramatic entry. Commanded by none other than Rogal Dorn, accompanied by a formidable fleet of Imperial Fists, which was bolstered by the reinforcements of the Armada Imperialis. The arrival of Dorn's forces ignited a new fervor in the Loyalist ranks, and with the employment of the unique gravitational forces within this sector of the Imperium, the Imperial Fists would execute a rather unconventional rapid approach, utilizing gravitational slingshots to traverse vast distances to Pluto, ironically in a way that largely resembles some methods of Tau travel. With renewed resolve, Dorn led his Huskarls in a direct assault of the astropathic chamber within Hydra. The tide of battle had turned, but the outcome would hang perilously in a battle between two Primarchs, as the fate of the Sol System was now hanging on a knife's edge. In a decisive moment of battle, Rogal Dorn and his remaining Huskarls would teleport directly into the fortified chamber of his brother Alpharius, confronting him and his entire cadre of Leranon Terminators directly. As the two Primarchs clashed, the air crackled with tension, and the dying Archimus watched in desperation, powerless to intervene as this life and death duel between demigods unfolded before him. Just as Alpharius prepared to deliver the final thrust with his pale spear, Archimus, though gravely wounded, summoned the last vestiges of his superhuman strength in an attempt to thwart the impending tragedy. However, his sacks harmlessly rebounded off the haft of the spear, leaving him vulnerable. Unbeknownst to Archimus, Dorn had anticipated the strike and, in a split-second decision, stepped in to absorb the blow, using his shoulder to pin Alpharius in place. Seizing this opportunity, Dorn grasped the spear with one hand and unleashed his deadly legendary chainsword, known as Storm's Teeth, slicing cleanly, or as much as a chainsword can, through Alpharius' wrists, severing his hands without hesitation. Dorn followed through with a brutal strike across his brother's chest, impaling him with his own legendary weapon. In a final devastating act of resolve and vengeance, Dorn delivered a decisive chop of his chainsword to the top of Alpharius' skull, sealing the fate of the traitor's Primarch. With the death of their leader, the Alpha Legion's fleet would quickly fall into disarray until Alpharius could be found again. At that moment, Omegon, the twin brother of Alpharius, felt a chilling loss within his very soul, as his sibling was now gone and he would withdraw into himself, distant and contemplative. Soon after, he received word from the War Master that he demanded to speak with Alpharius regarding the status of the Alpha Legion's incursion into the Sol System. As he had done countless times before, Omegon took on his brother's name and assumed the mantle of sole Primarch of the 20th Legion, forever altering the course of the war, as his decisions would drastically contrast with those of his twin brother. During the fabled Siege of Terra, the Imperial Fists, alongside the White Scars and Blood Angels, mounted a valiant defense of the Imperial Palace against the relentless forces of chaos. This heroic stand has since entered the records as a legend, and this incredible defense in essence highlights the unwavering dedication of the Space Marine legions. Originally commissioned to construct the Imperial Palace, Rogal Dorn was tasked by the Emperor to fortify its defenses against Horus's traitor legions. As the conflict reached its zenith and all hope dwindled, Dorn found himself fighting alongside the Emperor in the climactic confrontation aboard the War Master Horus's battleship, which is known as the Vengeful Spirit. In the aftermath of that devastating battle, it fell upon Dorn to bear witness to the tragic fates of the Emperor Horus and his beloved brother Sanguinius. The weight of this loss would go on to transform him from a noble guardian to a rather vengeful avenger. While the Ultramarines sought to restore order within the fractured Imperium, Dorn led the Imperial Fists on a relentless pursuit of the traitors across the galaxy, dismantling fortress after fortress during the Great Scouring, all the while being cloaked in black armor as a sign of mourning. During this epoch, he would set aside any semblance of mercy, intent on extracting a retribution for Horus's betrayal, a veritable pound of flesh. Rumors swirled that Dorn viewed the Emperor's death as a personal failure, a perspective which, if true, would have fueled his relentless campaigns against his former brothers. At this point, Dorn would remain largely absent from the highest echelons of the Imperium in the immediate aftermath of the Horus Heresy. That was until he was summoned back to Terra to confront Reboot Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, who had proposed the Codex Astartes as the foundation for the future of the Space Marines and the Imperial military as a whole. Now back to the Heresy. On the Saturnine Wall, Rogal Dorn took to the front lines. The elite Phoenician, Fulgrim, alongside his twisted and mutated 100,000 Space Marines, besieged this critical stronghold. All the while leading a contingent, Rogal Dorn would face them while leading a contingent of 200 hand-picked veterans who had originally been tasked with a separate mission. Dorn would reinforce the garrison of 500 Imperial Fists alongside 200 Auxilia defenders upon the wall. Amongst the defenders lay Captain Malidus, a new-blood Terran Marine who had been incapacitated and propped up against a broken pillar. As the duel between Fulgrim and Dorn unfolded, Maldius would witness this fierce confrontation. "Your pretty wall is broken, Rogal," Fulgrim taunted, slashing at Dorn's shield, sending splinters and rivets of metal flying. And Dorn would retaliate with a powerful blow that sent Fulgrim reeling, his greatsword cleaving into the traitor Primarch's side. Yet Fulgrim countered by relying on his agility to evade further damage. And he would continue as follows. "Are you truly not going to convince me that I've made a mistake?" Fulgrim provoked, blood dripping from his lips. "You can promise me sweet forgiveness." To which Dorn would reply by saying, "Deeds are my words," and thrust his sword into Fulgrim's shoulder, tossing him aside. The battle would continue to rage on, with Fulgrim landing furious blows, all the while Dorn held firm. The exchange of rapid strikes would ring out like church bells, each clash resonating with the weight of their conflict. Fulgrim, though wounded, continued to bait Dorn, attempting to exploit any signs of hesitation by stating the following. "Look around," Fulgrim shouted, his voice dripping with derision. "Your tower is tumbling down. In one night I cracked your shield and established a foothold." To this, Dorn would remain steadfast and unwavering, all the while declaring, "I see your siege machines burning at the foot of the wall, your sonic weapons silenced. You committed your entire host against a gap that could be held." As the clash intensified, Dorn would press his advantage, carving through Fulgrim's defenses. The traitor Primarch, though skilled, faltered against the disciplined might of the Imperial Fists. "Your forces are nothing," Dorn stated calmly. "You are merely a pawn in a larger game." Fulgrim, momentarily cut off by this statement, whispered, "It failed?" And then the realization struck him, as Dorn lunged once more, a strike that left Fulgrim's wrist severed, and his weapon dangling. In a moment that seemed to freeze time, Dorn drove his blade through Fulgrim's abdomen, the cold steel emerging from his spine. The two Primarchs stood for a heartbeat, as if locked in a brotherly embrace, before Dorn stepped back, ripping his sword free. In a spine-chilling manner, Fulgrim would continue on by saying, "Such a mess," blood spilling from his mouth. Yet he spoke as if nothing were wrong. Then the impossible occurred. His wounds began to close, his skin knitting itself seamlessly. "I cannot die," Fulgrim proclaimed, morphing into a colossal serpent, its scales gleaming with an unearthly light. He would tower over Dorn, and this form was a manifestation of his twisted, thrice-cursed power. "3," Fulgrim declared, now devoid of any semblance of his former self. "You will not see the end, Rogal. You will die here." With that, he glided away, vanishing into the shadows, as Dorn readied himself for the oncoming tides of foes that would bear down upon his walls once again. A ring of elite warriors from the Emperor's children encircled him, their gleaming armor seeming to shine as a testament of their malicious intent. Dorn steadied himself and raised his sword, stating fiercely, "Try me," prepared to take on the overwhelming odds that awaited him. In the wake of the Horus Heresy, the future of the Space Marine legions hung perilously in the balance. While many Primarchs rallied behind the innovative framework known as a Codex Astartes, Rogal Dorn, the stalwart leader of the Imperial Fists, initially resisted the radical proposal of dividing his legion into 1,000 warrior-strong chapters. His dissent echoed the statements of fellow Primarchs such as Leman Russ and Vulcan, who opposed the fragmentation of the legions. In contrast, Corvus Corax and Jagatai Khan stood firmly in the support of Reboot Guilliman's vision for the future of the Imperium. Amidst this brewing conflict, guidance would come from an unexpected source, Captain Auriax Dantalion, a seasoned veteran of the Imperial Fists. Dantalion, who fought valiantly during the Great Crusade and had survived the brutal tides of the Siege of Terra, found himself advocating for the very changes that Dorn had resisted. As one of the few Imperial Fists who recognized at the time the necessity of Guilliman's controversial decree, Dantalion understood that the risks of a single officer wielding the immense power of an entire legion was too great to ignore. Undeterred by the weight of his argument, Dantalion engaged in an extensive, somewhat forceful discussion with Dorn, articulating the prescient need for the proposed restructuring. He argued that new chapters would serve to malign the risk of future rebellions. Yet despite this compelling rationale, Dorn would remain as ever steadfast. Viewing the Captain's Council as a betrayal, disappointment and hostility would brew within Dorn, casting a shadow over the once respectful relationship that he had had with all his sons. As tension escalated, it became increasingly clear that the Imperium stood on the precipice of a civil war. The prospect of the newly formed chapters clashing with the remaining legions loomed ominously over the horizon, and it seemed that both sides were prepared for the inevitable confrontation that would occur. It was then that Dorn would have a profound moment of introspection. In the midst of his relentless quest for vengeance, he recognized that his refusal to embrace change had blinded him to the crucial truth: the future of the Imperium depended on unity and adaptation. This pivotal realization marked a turning point for Rogal Dorn and the Imperial Fists, siding, though with some conditions, to the beginnings of a new chapter in the Adeptus Astartes history, one that would redefine their purpose and ensure the survival of humanity as a whole. As tensions within the Imperium were reaching a boiling point, Rogal Dorn had faced the stark realization that the Ultramarines, alongside the newly formed Space Marine chapters, the Navy, and the fledgling Astra Militarum, were prepared fully to engage in a civil war with the Imperial Fists, rather than permit him to evade the mandates of the Codex Astartes and the necessity of a second founding. Despite his deep affection for the Space Marines under his command, Dorn held an even greater love for the Imperium, which the God Emperor had forged. The thought of subjecting it to another devastating conflict, practically in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, weighed heavily on his conscience. With a profound sense of sorrow, he acquiesced to the reforms that Guilliman had requested. Thus, Dorn ultimately relented, consenting to the formation of several new chapters, each consisting of 1,000 Astartes drawn from the ranks of the Imperial Fists. These would include the Black Templars, the Crimson Fists, the Excoriators, the Iron Knights, and the Fists Exemplar. Each of these second founding chapters bore the unique character of their constituent members. The 7th Legion's fervent crusaders gravitated towards Sigismund, while the younger, more impressionable Imperial Fists aligned with Alexis Pollux of the Crimson Fists. Many of the seasoned fighters would band together and form the Excoriators. Many of the seasoned fighters forming the Excoriators had valiantly defended the walls of the Imperial Palace during the Siege of Terra, finding camaraderie with Demetrius Catafule. Meanwhile, the newly created Soul Drinkers were mistakenly believed to be descended from the fleet-based stock of assault specialists from the 7th Legion. During this time, Dorn would also recall the early wisdom exhibited by Captain Damaltan, and in recognition of his foresight, he would appoint the captain as the first chapter of the newly formed Fists exemplars. This chapter would be composed of the more progressive thinkers of the Imperial Fists, who shared Dalmatan's visions for the future. Rogal Dorn's willingness to set aside his pride and embrace the Codex Astartes would provide a measure of reassurance to the High Lords of Terra. When the Imperial Fists emerged from the Second Founding, their commitment to Guilliman's principles rivaled that of the Ultramarines themselves in many different degrees, solidifying their place in the ever-evolving structure of the Imperium and paving a way for a more unified future. The animosity and rivalry between the Imperial Fists and the Iron Warriors could be traced back all the way to the early days of the Great Crusade, where Perturabo of the Iron Warriors harbored a profound jealousy along with enmity towards Rogal Dorn, and this rift would only deepen when Perturabo aligned himself with the traitorous forces of Horus, transforming their rivalry into a bitter loathing. Both Imperial Fists and Iron Warriors were recognized for their mastery of siege warfare, employing artillery and heavy weapons as essential components of their combat doctrines. However, in contrast, the Imperial Fists maintained a code of honor and restraint which starkly contrasted the Iron Warriors' more ruthless utilitarian tactic, which would lead to one of the most pivotal effects. And in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Imperial Fists remained resolute, almost focused to their own detriment, on their pursuit of the Iron Warriors, leading to a catastrophic confrontation which is known as the Iron Cage on Sebastus IV. Here, the Imperial Fists would witness their own forces suffering devastating losses as they engaged with the Iron Warriors in a battle which would be etched into the record books, though ignored by some, as one of the single most greatest losses the Imperium had ever witnessed. Perturabo, renowned for his expertise, a skill acknowledged by Rabut Guilliman in Rabut Guilliman's Codex Astartes, prepared a confrontation through meticulous preparations, one specifically designed for Dorn, one which would exploit their shared expertise in siege warfare. And in this confrontation, Dorn would find himself indignant not only to Perturabo's betrayal, but also the ruthless display from his brother. The clash was not merely a contest of arms, but a profound ideological struggle, which led to Dorn not requesting aid as soon as necessary, since it was pitting honor against ambition and loyalty against treachery, which further still led to losses. And this would be a departure from Dorn's usual meticulous calculations, as he personally would lead the Imperial Fists into the very heart of the Iron Warriors' fortifications on Sebastus. These defenses, known as the Eternal Fortress, were an imposing network of pillboxes, trenches, and fortified positions designed in the shape of an 8-pointed star of chaos, situated on Sebastus IV. This stronghold would become known as the Iron Cage, in part due to one of Rogal Dorn's statements that he would drag out Perturabo from this fortification in an iron cage. The odds of this conflict heavily favored the Iron Warriors, renowned for their trench warfare and their ruthless tactics. Yet against all expectations, the Imperial Fists seemed to endure, countering ambush after ambush, skillfully evading traps, as Dorn himself showed to be a martial figure of peerless expertise on the battlefield, repelling wave after wave of attacks. The battle brothers of the Fists, unfortunately, would be worn down and left armed with only combat knives within half-flooded trenches, but still they would continue to fight fiercely, expecting no mercy in return. As the battle dragged on, and the losses continued to mount, in particular for Rogal Dorn, it became evident that at the rate that they were going, the Iron Warriors could not deliver a decisive blow before reinforcements arrived. Despite their ferocity, it seemed they lacked the unwavering faith necessary to make the ultimate sacrifice for victory, an absence that ultimately seemed to seal their fate. In a surprising turn of events, reinforcements would arrive, despite not being openly requested. Primarch Rabut Guilliman recognized that the destruction of Perturabo was not worth the potential loss of Dorn and what amounted to an entire legion that was meant to be broken up. His own fully armed and equipped legion quickly drove the Iron Warriors from the scene, and apparently having caused enough damage to be considered a sacrifice worthy to promote Perturabo to that level of a demon Primarch of Chaos Undivided. Having emerged from the Iron Cage, the Imperial Fists began the vital process of reorganizing into Space Marine chapters, as mandated by the Codex Astartes. Over the next 2 solar decades, the surviving Imperial Fists retreated and rebuilt their numbers, while the newly founded successor chapters took to the battlefield in their stead. During this period, Dorn dedicated himself to retraining his chapter from the ground up, instilling a deep adherence for the tenets tenets of the Codex Astartes and ensuring their loyalty to its principles. Rogal Dorn is believed by many, and evidence shows he met his demise in 781 M31 during a fateful confrontation with a chaos fleet that emerged from the Eye of Terror. This fleet was commanded by the notorious Warmaster of Chaos, Abaddon the Despoiler, who sought to unleash devastation upon the Imperial Palace once again, much like his own father had, facing a vastly outnumbered Imperial force. Recognizing the critical nature of this movement, Dorn executed a series of strategic hit-and-run attacks aiming to disrupt the enemy's preparations before reinforcements could arrive. In a valiant effort, Dorn led a desperate assault aboard the Chaos Despoiler class battleship, the Sword of Sacrilege, and it was during this audacious attack on the ship's bridge that it was believed that Dorn had died. Despite the chaos and the devastation of battle, the Imperial Fists subsequently launched a thorough search and rescue mission for their missing Primarch. Tragically, the only remnant that was recovered was a solitary skeletal hand of their Primarch, which is seen as proof that he has died and his flesh was picked apart. The skeletal hand would be returned to the Phalanx, the flagship of the Imperial Fists, and the fortress-monastery as well, where it would become a symbol of enduring loyalty and honor. Over the years, the bones would be meticulously scrimshawed with intricate engravings of heraldry from all the previous chapter masters of the Imperial Fists, in a time-honored tradition where only the current chapter master has the privilege to etch their name upon the retrieved remains, preserving their tie to the legacy of Rogal Dorn for future generations. Over the course of 10 millennia, the skeletal remains of Rogal became a site of pilgrimage. Now, onto the present. In the year 995-999 M41, the Imperial Fists aboard the Storm of Wrath prepared to engage in a crucial campaign against the Iron Warriors on the demon world of Medrengard, as Abaddon the Despoiler launched his penultimate crusade, the 13th Black Crusade. The Storm of the Watch, however, was not an ordinary vessel, as it carried 5 companies of Imperial Fists, a formidable force tasked with breaching the Iron Warriors' fearsome fortifications. Upon their arrival at the Cadian Gate, the Imperial Fists joined the vast assembly of Astartes reinforcements, determined to stem the tide of chaos threatening Cadia. As soon as contact was made, the 5 companies simultaneously surged into battle, striking against the forces of the arch-enemy. The initial void engagement saw the chapter's battle barges and strike cruisers inflicting significant damage on the Chaos War Fleet, paving a way for a more direct confrontation, as 3 of the Imperial Fists companies executed combat drops into Cadia itself, while the remaining 2 deployed to bolster the defenses in neighboring sectors, including a critical reinforcement of the Iron Hands chapter on their homeworld of Medusa. The first and second elements of the third companies played vital roles in defending strategic positions on Cadia, maintaining the walls of multiple fortresses with the thematic Imperial Fist unwavering resolve, for which they are renowned throughout the Imperium, across the Imperium. Amongst these actions, the second company distinguished itself through extraordinary acts as they faced the overwhelming onslaught on the Stygium's Segmentum Covenant, a chaos cult whose ranks swelled to nearly 10,000 traitor fanatics. During this ferocious assault on the walls of Caesar Vassan, Captain Tylo, the commanding officer of the second company, made the ultimate sacrifice, as he valiantly held the breach in the fortifications, repelling hundreds of mutants before succumbing to grievous wounds himself. Yet even in death, Talio's story was not over. His body-defying finality was preserved in stasis by the chapter's tech marines. Their intention was clear: to inter the fallen captain into the mighty form of a dreadnought, ensuring that the celebrated warrior could continue combating the forces of chaos long after his mortal life had ended. And he remains as a testament to the Imperial Fists' unyielding steadfastness and their commitment to the Imperium. In the climactic events of 995-999 M41, the Phalanx, the formidable super vessel serving as the Imperial Fist chapter monastery, orbited Terra when another insidious threat emerged. The Iron Warriors' warsmith Sun Tzu, accompanied by his demonic allies, materialized from a warp rift within the ship's core, igniting a fierce battle. At the forefront of this defense was the newly forged Third Company of Imperial Fists, under the command of the recently promoted Captain Garradon. As the boarders launched their assault on the corridors of the Phalanx, the echoes of thunder from bolter fire would reverberate. Yet despite their resolve, the Imperial Fists struggled to repel the relentless advance of the demonic prince of chaos undivided, Be'lakor, whose dark powers threatened to overwhelm them utterly and completely. Sun Tzu directed his forces towards the ship's gun decks, intent on harnessing the Phalanx's cataclysmic firepower to bombard the Imperial Palace upon Terra. With insufficient manpower to halt this catastrophic plan, the Imperial Fists initiated an emergency transition into the warp, plunging their vessel into the chaotic currents of the Imperium. As the battle raged on within the ship, it seemed that all hope was lost. However, a surge of spiritual fire suddenly would engulf the lower decks, driving back the demonic horde. When the ethereal flames receded, an unprecedented contingent of the Legion of the Damned would emerge. Their presence was a harbinger of vengeance, as these spiritual warriors would move with a ruthless efficiency unparalleled within the Imperium, as they systematically exterminated the remaining surviving Iron Warriors and demons, turning the tides of battle. Emboldened by the unexpected arrival of their spectral allies, the Imperial Fists would once again rally to launch a spirited counterattack against Shushan's forces. This fierce resurgence culminated in a hard-fought victory, with Captain Garradon and his battered remnants of Imperial Fists setting a course straight for Cadia. Despite their triumph aboard the Phalanx, the Imperial Fists faced grim news upon their arrival to Cadia. Their valiant efforts, including the destruction of the Blackstone Fortress, Will of Eternity, proved insufficient to stem Abaddon's relentless assault, as Cadia ultimately fell. The Phalanx would then play a pivotal role in the final evacuation of the planet's survivors, ensuring that hope endured in the face of this overwhelming darkness, and in essence, creating an encampment where Cadians could continue to serve the Imperium from. The resurgence of the Imperial Fists would come in later, with the onset of the Era Indomitus, which was marked by the climactic opening of the Great Rift, where the forces of chaos would launch a renewed, devastating offensive against the Imperium. Yet amidst this chaos, the Imperial Fists, scions of Rogal Dorn, remained resolute, viewing the Imperium as an immense fortress with its beleaguered worlds serving as turrets, gatehouses, and strongpoints. The Imperial Fists would then undertake a series of defensive maneuvers and aggressive offenses designed to repel the enemy and to reclaim territory. At the heart of these efforts was the Phalanx, the Imperial Fists' bastion in almost constant orbit above Terra. This formidable supervessel periodically would embark on critical missions, but would consistently remain to safeguard the Segmentum Solar, fulfilling its role as a vigilant sentinel for the Imperium. Now here are some points of interest. Number 1. The Terran Crusade, circa 999 M41. During the Terran Crusade, an Imperial Fist strike force played a crucial role in rescuing the resurrected Primarch Guilliman following his pivotal journey to Luna. In this endeavor, they successfully repelled the pursuing forces of the Chaos God Tzeentch, ensuring Guilliman completed his pilgrimage to Terra in order to reunite with the Emperor. Also on 999 M41 would be the Battle of Lion's Gate. As the dawn of the Noctis Aetherna approached, the Imperial Fists stood shoulder to shoulder with the resurrected Guilliman and his Ultramarines, all the while fiercely battling the nigh unending demon hordes serving the blood god Khorne, who had at that moment dared invade Terra, whose collective resolve would be crumbled by the Fists' decisive victory, further solidifying the Imperial Fists' reputation as the stalwart defenders of the throne world. And further still, many Imperial Fists would join the Indomitus Crusade throughout the initial stages in particular, as the Imperial Fists would continue to distinguish themselves in battles alongside their new Lord Commander, Guilliman, as their strategic mind was able to help in the tumultuous period, in particular being able to safeguard humanity against overwhelming odds through their expertise. The next campaign would occur at an unknown date during M42, known as the Ironhold Campaign. Driven by a thirst for vengeance against the Iron Warriors, in particular those who damaged the Phalanx and fled, the Imperial Fists launched a targeted assault on the traitorous stronghold known as the Ironhold, actively collaborating with the vengeful Cadian shock trooper armies and several night houses that had escaped the destruction of Cadia and resided upon the Phalanx for a prolonged period of time. The Imperial forces penetrated all 8 layers of the Iron Warriors' defenses, decimating their fortifications with a ruthless efficiency seen rarely in the 41st millennium. And it would be shortly after this that the Fourth Tyrannic War would break out. And within the Fourth Tyrannic War, the White Templars, chapter planet Sanctum, would be forced to face an onslaught from High Fleet Relentless, a tendril of the greater High Fleet Leviathan, advancing from the Galactic Core. With the support of Lord Commander Solar, Octaldian Leontus, and the Astra Militarum forces, who utilized Sanctum as a strategic base against the Great Devourer, the White Templars, aided by the Imperial Fists and the Phalanx, would successfully repel the Tyranid assault. In these pivotal moments, the Imperial Fists would continue to embody the enduring spirit of their Primarch, proving that in the darkest times, their legacy of resilience and valor would remain unyielding for whichever threats may come.